Lost in the Pages, the podcast where we just love books. I'm SJ, your friendly neighborhood bookworm, and today we're talking about what is surely on the minds of most of us, the new year. That's right, we are officially in 2025. 24 is over. Go ahead and let out a big sigh of relief. Now, you may have heard the saying, new year, new you. Well, this year we're shaking things up a bit by having a new year, mostly the same you kind of mindset. It's more realistic. Reinventing yourself every year sounds exhausting. For those of you who follow the blog, which you definitely should for spoiler-free positive perspectives on books, you'll probably already know that each year I like to do Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge. I still intend to complete the Book Riot Read Harder Challenge for 2025, and knock on wood, I'll actually finish the challenge this year. It's one of several goals I have for the new year. Finish the reading challenge, run or briskly jog at least 1 mile every day, and get stronger so that I can carry my husband and dog out of a burning building just because I'm a paranoid person and I like to be prepared. Considering the most of last year's resolutions didn't actually happen, this might seem a little overly ambitious, but hey, we're all about positivity here, and I am positive that an attempt will be made. Another goal for this year, which actually might be a little controversial for a book blogger, is to actually read less books. The horror, I know. But there are so many things that I want to do with my year. And like Dumbledore says in The Sorcerer's Stone, it does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live. I absolutely adore books, but escaping into books instead of actually processing my feelings and talking to my therapist is not the healthiest of coping strategies. Most years, I end up reading about 150 books. So this year, the plan is to cap it at 100, which I mean, is still a lot. Some of these books will be from the reading challenge, and some of them will be from a new book review series on the blog called Lesser Knowns You Should Own. For this, I'll be reading and providing positive perspectives on books with less than 1,000 reviews on Amazon and Goodreads. It's entirely possible that these books will explode within the time frame that it takes for me to select them, read them, and write a review, and then publish that review. The goal, however, is to stick with books under that 1,000 number. So if any of you would like to recommend a book, whether for this series or for me to just read in general, make sure you let me know. Now, as a general disclaimer, I access most of the books that I read and review through Kindle Unlimited, my local library, or Audible. My local library is staffed pretty much entirely by angels, and they are very, very good at finding even the most random of books. I don't think there's ever been an instance where I've not been able to find a book using one of these methods. There are a lot of other reading challenges to choose from. Pop Sugar has one, the 52 Book Club, Barnes & Noble, and many more all have great reading challenges, but Book Riots is my personal favorite. It helps to push me to read books and explore genres that I may not have found on my own, which is my favorite part of doing a reading challenge. Now, let's get into the books for this year's challenge. So challenge number 1 is read a 2025 release by a BIPOC author. BIPOC is by Black, Indigenous, or person of color author, just in case you didn't know that, but there's a definition for you. This challenge on its own isn't a bad challenge. It's a good challenge. It being number 1 on the list, however, does make a small part of my brain twitch a little bit, and not in the happy twitch kind of way. I typically like to follow the challenge in numerical order because lists make me happy, but it's difficult to do this when the first challenge is about a book that's being released this year. I would have put it further down on the list, but you know, it just means I'm gonna have to push myself even further out of my comfort zone this year. But for this challenge, I'm reading The Baby Dragon Cafe by A.T. Qureshi. The minor issue with the list notwithstanding, I am ridiculously excited about this book, guys. Let me read you the synopsis. When Saphira opened up her cafe for baby dragons and their humans, she wasn't expecting it to be so difficult to keep the fires burning. It turns out young dragons are not the best magical animals to keep in a cafe. And replacing all that burnt furniture is costing Saphira more than she can afford from selling dragon roasted coffee. Aiden is a local gardener and local heartthrob, more interested in his plants than actually spending time with his disobedient baby dragon. When Aiden walks into Saphira's cafe, he has a genius idea. He'll ask Saphira to train his baby dragon, and he'll pay her enough to keep the cafe afloat. Saphira's happy-go-lucky attitude doesn't seem to do anything but irritate the grumpy but gorgeous Aiden, except that everywhere she goes, she finds him there. But can this dragon cafe owner turn her fortunes around and maybe find love along the way? Does that not sound adorable? I mean, we got baby dragons, cute little fire-breathing baby dragons, and we have a grumpy sunshine pairing as well. I'm so excited to read this one. Challenge 2 is to reread a childhood favorite book. Considering that I've been a bookworm for my entire life, we have video evidence of me snatching my books from my baby brother's hands, presumably out of fear that he would damage them. So I had a lot of options for this challenge. Thinking through books I remember loving, but that I haven't actually read or thought of in a while, I was reminded of the Royal Diaries series. This was a series of 20 books that came out between 1999 and 2005. Each of the books is a fictional childhood diary of real royal women from world history. There was a book about Elizabeth I, Cleopatra, Catherine the Great, Marie Antoinette, but the one I remember the most vividly is Lady of Qiaoqiu, Warrior of the South, Southern China, from 531 AD by Lawrence Yep. So let's see if my adult self loves this as much as my childhood self did. Challenge 3 is to read a queer mystery. So for this book, I was thinking of reading Scorched Grace by Margot Douaihy. I'm sorry if I am butchering or have butchered any of the names. I blame being from the southern United States and not being able to say most words correctly. But this book definitely fits the bill for a queer mystery. We have a tattooed, chain-smoking lesbian nun who solves crime. The cover for this is absolutely beautiful as well. It's a colored stained glass image, but the pose and face of the nun is reminiscent of noir. So I'm curious to see how the book translates this seeming blend between colorful and vibrancy with the grittier noir aspects of that genre. So challenge number 4 is to read a book about obsession. And for this challenge, I selected The Man Who Loved Books Too Much by Allison Hoover Bartlett. Now, I promise that I'm not only reading this book because the irony of the title makes me giggle. It's a true story of a book thief, a man that was so obsessed with books that he stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of them and didn't feel bad about it at all. It's like, sir, that's what libraries are for, so that we don't have to resort to grand larceny. Challenge number 5 is to read a book about immigration or refugees. So for this challenge, I'm going to read The Keeping Quilt by Patricia Polacco. This children's book is about a family that turns the clothes that they outgrow after immigrating to America into a quilt, and it's based on the author's family. So the illustrations are designed to draw attention to the fabric and the quilt itself. The fabric and the parts of the quilt are the brightest spots of color. The quilt holds memories in the fabric and in the carefully chosen stitches that the family puts together. As someone who loves to sew, how can I not read this book? For challenge number 6, Challenge number 6 is to read a standalone fantasy book. Now, fantasy is probably my favorite genre. Most of my bookshelf is composed of fantasy novels, especially fantasy romance novels, which makes the fact that I have never read a Brandon Sanderson novel even more surprising. I know. But I'm using this challenge to remedy this travesty. So I'm reading Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This book is being compared to The Princess Bride. Inconceivable. Let's read it and find out. Challenge number 7 is to read a book about a piece of media that you love, whether it's a TV show, a movie, a band, etc. And for this, I found what might be one of my favorite things I'm going to read all year, Doctor Who Time Lord Fairy Tales. It's got 2 of my favorite things in the world, Doctor Who and fairy tales, combined into one. The only real question with this book is how many hours I will spend talking about and explaining the stories in this book to my husband, which is definitely his favorite thing about being married to a reader. Challenge number 8 is to read literary fiction by a BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and or a disabled author. And just to define all of those acronyms for you real quick, like we said previously, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, Person of Color, and then LGBTQIA+ is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, and asexual, and the plus is for anything else that falls under that umbrella. So for this category, I selected The Vanishing Half by Brit, Bennett. To make this challenge easier to navigate, it's best to define what literary fiction actually is. Per the Google, it's a category of novels that emphasize style, character, and theme over plot. It often explores different social and political issues, and this book definitely fits that. The main social and political issues explored in this book are related to race within the United States, specifically between the eras of the 50s to the 90s, but considering that the issues that are raised in this book still affect the lives of literally millions of people, the themes are definitely relevant to today. Challenge number 9 is to read a book based solely on its setting. Oh, hi! Hi, buddy! You want some love? Okay. Sorry, my dog decided he needed attention right now. Back to the challenges. So, challenge 9, book based solely on the setting. For this, I selected The City of Ember by Jeanne DuPrau, which, listen to what this is about. It's about an underground city that has to constantly man the electricity in order to sustain life. So you aren't on the surface. Everything from water to light to food to air has an electrical component. So if you look at the cover of this book, the city is illustrated inside of a literal light bulb. How can you not want to know more about this post-apocalyptic world? So now we're on number 10. Challenge number 10 is to read a romance book that doesn't have an illustrated cover, which is definitely the trend for romance novels right now. There are still some modern ones that don't have illustrated covers, but for this, I went back in time just a little bit and selected The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. This is a book that's been on my TBR, my to-be-read list, for years. Pretty much since the movie starring Eric Bana and Rachel McAdams came out in 2009, this book has been on my list. And this challenge gives me the kick in the teeth to settle in, grab a box or 2 of tissues, make sure my dog is close enough for snuggles, and read and possibly sob. Challenge number 11 is to read a work of weird horror. So this is another category of books where Googling definitions is helpful, because weird horror isn't just horror books that are odd or strange. So instead of thinking of the movie Killer Sofa, which isn't even about a sofa, it's about a recliner, which is one of the reasons why it's so weird, you want to think more H.P. Lovecraft kind of weird, where it's unsettling, there's this level of uncertainty about what's real, the insignificance of humans in the face of a larger foe is a big part of this genre, which is why eldritch horror is kind of considered like a sub-genre within it. But it doesn't necessarily have traditional horror elements, like axe wielders, jump scares, a sudden inability to not trip over everything. So all of the blurbs for this book make it sound like it'll work for this challenge. If I'm wrong or if I've completely misunderstood this genre, let me know. But based on my understanding of what weird horror is, I'm gonna read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So challenge 12 is to read a staff pick from an indie bookstore, preferably from your local indie bookstore. My favorite local indie bookstore is Parnassus, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's actually run by the author Anne Patchett, who wrote Dutch House, as well as many, many other books. There's a section on Parnassus's website called Anne's Latest Picks, which is where I saw Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls. This cover immediately grabbed my attention. It's bright green with eyes that look more like headlights and a mouth that looks like a fold in some fabric. And the description is just as weird as the cover is. The plot concerns a lonely housewife who finds companionship with an amphibious sea monster named Larry. Clearly, Anne and I have similarly great taste. Next, we have Lucky Challenge number 13, which is to read a nonfiction book about nature or the environment. And for that challenge, I'm going to read The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. That might not even remotely be how you say that. Feel free to correct me down in the comments. Growing up on the movie Fern Gully, though, means that I'm predisposed to love trees and nature. Learning more about these incredible plants that apparently trees can talk to each other. They have feelings, apparently. I can't wait to learn all about trees, which, considering the sheer amount of outdoor allergies I have, learning about trees is probably best done through books like this. Next is challenge number 14, which is to read a comic in translation. Now, I might be flubbing this challenge a little bit. The book I selected is technically a graphic novel. I did try to find an actual comic book that was much more difficult for me to locate. Now, the main difference between graphic novels and comic books is that comic books are typically more serialized stories that are shorter in length, and the serialized stories can continue over like months, sometimes years between different segments of it, whereas graphic novels tend to be longer than comic books, and they usually have their storylines wrapped up in like 1 or 2 books instead of it spanning for a longer running series. So this graphic novel, Grass by Keum Gendry-Kim, it was originally published in Korean, and it follows this true story of a Korean woman who's forced to become a comfort woman for the Japanese Imperial Army. Now, the term comfort woman makes it sound a lot nicer than it actually was. These women and girls were forced into sexual slavery. Next up, we have challenge number 15, which is to read a banned book and then to complete a task on Book Riot's How to Fight book bans guides that they have on their website. For this challenge, it's relatively easy to find lists of banned books, which is a great thing for this challenge, but the amount of options that you have to pick from is baffling. It's one of the main reasons why reading banned books is so important. So by talking about this, not only on this podcast, but we're going to go into more detail on banned books when talking about this book in particular, The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, and when we discuss the book that I selected for one of the later challenges about a moral panic. We're going to dive much deeper into book bans and how completely screwed up they are. Challenge 16 is to read a genre blending book. So a genre blending book is exactly what it sounds like. It's a book that blends 2 or more different genres together, whether that's fantasy horror, humor memoir, or like this book, why are words so hard? Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer, which is an office romance meets superhero story. Doesn't that just sound like a fun read, especially after 2 kind of darker reads in a row? Next, we have challenge number 17, which is to read a book about little-known history. For this, I selected Batavia's Graveyard, which is by Mike Dash. This is the true story of the bloodiest mutiny in history, which apparently occurred in 1629. So instead of just propping the captain up on an island with barrels of buried rum, a la Captain Jack Sparrow, they massacred at least 110 people. So a little bit more dramatic. Next, we're going back into some happy books with challenge number 18, which is to read a cozy book by a BIPOC author. For this, I selected That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human by Kimberly Lemming. This is book 3 of Lemming's Mead Mishap series, and Lemming is she's so great at cozy romantic fantasy. There's lots of humor and heart, and I fully expect to love this book just as much as the first 2. So for challenge 19 is to read a queer norm book. A queer norm book is a book where the world in which the story takes place treats queer people as regular people, where LGBTQ is considered normal and is therefore free from the discrimination and phobias that can often surround queer people in our world. So sci-fi and fantasy are really great at doing this really well. In this book, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, we follow a crew of all sorts of people, not all of them human, that get into some shenanigans. That reminds me a bit of the classic short-running sci-fi series, Firefly. Moving on to challenge number 20, which is to read the first book in a completed young adult or middle grade duology. For this, I picked These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. You just have to hear the premise for this. It's so creative, and I love it. It's Romeo and Juliet, but set it in Shanghai, China, and have it take place in the 1920s. Doesn't that just sound so intriguing? Historical fiction meets the retelling of a classic. Now, let's just hope that this couple has a happier ending. Challenge 21 is to read a book about a moral panic. Now, moral panics are a fascinating thing to study. The way people have panicked over a perceived moral failing or corruption. So The 10-Cent Plague by David Haiju follows the moral panic surrounding comic books. So if you think books being banned and challenged nowadays is bad, just wait until you read about the comic book burnings and censorship that basically banned all ugly or poorly dressed people, because ugly people and poor people were apparently considered morally suspect in the 40s and 50s. Then, after some moral panic, we're going to go back and have a little bit of a cozy read with challenge number 22, which is to read a holiday romance that isn't Christmas. So for this, I selected Meteors and Menorahs by Nessa Cloud, which is a holiday romance centered around Hanukkah. Not only that, but it's a sci-fi romance with an undercover alien. I am expecting plenty of hilarious and possibly some steamy shenanigans to ensue. Challenge 23 is to read a wordless comic. So for this, I selected Robot Dreams by Sarah Varon. It just looks so adorable. There's a robot, there's a dog, and they're best friends. Now, I'm probably gonna cry at this one because I'm a sucker for any that's anthropomorphized. Last, but certainly not least, is challenge number 24, which is to pick a 2015 Read Harder Challenge task to complete. So there were 24 options from 2015, and I selected read a book published before 1850. This challenge allows me to finally read Emma by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is one of my absolutely favorite authors of all time. I reread Pride and Prejudice pretty much every year, but I've never actually read Emma. And so I finally have the nudge I need to finally read this classic. So that's all the challenges for Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge 2025. Hopefully this breakdown of the challenges, as well as the explanations for the books that I picked, will help you if you're doing this challenge, or maybe even give you some suggestions to add to your own TBR list. Make sure to let me know if you've read any of these books. Did you love them? Hate them? Do you question my judgment or reading comprehension due to my interpretation of the challenges? Let me know. If you like books, like talking about books, or just enjoy the melodic tones of my voice, consider subscribing. I upload every Friday. You can connect with me through any and all of the socials, or you can always shoot me an email. All of those links are in the description below. I'm gonna go read now. Bye.